Whether we realize it or not, all of us are looking for a leader or follow. We spend different seasons going from teachers to family members to movie stars and athletes, looking for the perfect role model for our life. Each and every time, we find that the people we have chosen to put our hope in let us down. What if this didn't have to be the case? What if there's a perfect leader that we all have the chance to follow? As we read the Bible over and over again, we find Jesus' simple, radical call. Come, follow me. What does it mean to follow the leader? Let's find out together.
Hey, hope you're doing well. Ryan here, campus pastor of our Elliott campus. And before we jump into our conversation on Follow the Leader, the series that we've been in here for the last couple of weeks, wanted to remind you that we just started live in-person services here just a couple of weeks ago, and I want to invite you to those if you are healthy and able to come to them. So exciting to be together and be able to gather in person. But if you're not, continue to watch. We're going to continue to be here each and every week, and so make sure to continue to tune in that way. If you're a guest with us and you maybe would want some more information about the church, we would love to connect with you. So maybe reach out, let us know in the comments, or shoot us a text or a phone call, and we'd love to connect that way. And also, for all of you who maybe have been staying connected online, you're part of the campus, or you're considering becoming part of the campus, just want to say thanks so much for your faithfulness in giving financially through these last weeks and months when we've not been gathered together because of COVID. And just want to say appreciate you doing that as we're continuing to do everything that a church wants to do and would do. We're continuing to function that way, and excited to move forward as a church body. So appreciate that. And as we dive into our conversation here, we're going to continue our series on Follow the Leader. We started that just a few weeks ago, and here's what we kind of said as we dove in. We said leadership is has an interesting place in our lives. We said we kind of want it, we're drawn to it. We all kind of are raised looking at role models and people in our lives that we kind of end up mimicking. And sometimes those are family members, sometimes those are coaches or teachers or people in our relative circle of life. Sometimes they're people that are far away. They're kind of celebrities or athletes or leaders of certain kinds that we would look to and say, man, I want to be like that when I grow up. I want to kind of mold my life after that person. And we said one of the things we run into as we follow leaders in our lives is we run into the humanity that inevitably kind of surfaces. All right, we see that all of us are imperfect. Nobody is going to be the perfect leader, of course. And so while we're drawn to leaders and we're influenced by them, and some of that can be a very good thing, there's also the reality that we have seen leaders fail. We've been hurt by leaders, and so we're drawn to leadership. We're also repelled by it. We're kind of put off by it, and we're a little bit gun-shy to trust another leader with our lives and with kind of the direction of our lives in our kind of pursuit of our goals. And so one of the things that's interesting and what we wanted to dive into in this series is kind of looking at and understanding what would it look like to look at Jesus as our leader to follow. We kind of keep Jesus in the religion box, and that's, I think, a natural thing for us to do in our culture. We think of Jesus, we think of church, and we tend to think of religion, and we tend to think of a certain set of expectations that goes along with that. We said, what if we kind of pulled Jesus out of the religion box for a minute and thought of him as our leader to follow? What would that look like as we unpack that, right? Because we said one of the things that's unique about Jesus is the kind of the magnitude of his influence, the fact that he claims to be God, that he's never sinned, that he's not ever going to be a leader that could fail us if, in fact, what he said is true about himself. And as we are objective and kind of look at what he's done on the planet, it's unbelievable to see the influence that Jesus had. He has had billions of followers. The book that is kind of about him and captures his heart is the best-selling book of all time. We said literally time is built around when we think he was born. And 2,000 years later, his influence is actually larger and more profound than it was 2,000 years ago when he was still on the planet. It's fascinating to see Jesus's massive leadership, his influence in the lives of so many people, and how he's affected people all around the globe. So that's what we dove into. Last week we looked at kind of the fact that he is trustworthy as a leader, and that he's worth kind of following. And part of that's the nature of who he is. We said that he is light, and in him there's no darkness at all. So he is completely pure in his motivations, and he wants to give that kind of purity to us in our lives. So if you missed that conversation or the previous one, maybe encourage you to catch up online. And of course, you can do that on our website and follow us, follow along that way as well. Today, what we want to do is dive into the fact that Jesus is also a servant leader. He's a servant leader. And we want to look at him kind of through a different paradigm. And that's what we're doing in the course of this series, is kind of taking different looks at the person of Jesus, and we want to examine his leadership and kind of understand what does it mean to follow him, and how does that all play out when we hear his invitation to come follow me. What is that going to look like in my life, and how's that going to change me as I follow the leader? So I want to dive into a story today of Jesus kind of interacting with some of his followers, and this interchange is going to reveal a ton about who Jesus is, about what he thinks about leadership and service and how it all works together. And I think we're going to learn a ton from it. So what I want to do is kind of walk through the passage with you, explain a couple pieces of it, and then we'll kind of dive into it from there, see how it kind of applies to our lives. So here's where we're going to be in Matthew chapter 20. So if you have a Bible, you can open that up and follow along with us if you want in Matthew 20, or you can just look on the screen here as we begin to dive into it. So here's what he says in Matthew chapter 20, verse 20. It says, "Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons, and kneeling down, asked a favor of him. 'What is it you want?' he asked. She said, 'Grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in the kingdom.' 'You don't know what you're asking,' Jesus said to them. 'Can you drink from the cup that I'm going to drink?' 'We can,' they answered." Let me just pause here for a minute. So you have this opening scene, and in the story, there's these the mother of Zebedee's sons, right? They come to Christ, and so these are going to be two of Jesus's disciples, James and John, with their mom. This is fantastic, right? And we don't know exactly how this all plays out, but somehow mom gets involved, and she comes to Jesus and basically says, "Hey, Jesus, here's my boys here. You know how great they are. When you go into your kingdom one day, right, when you're ruling and reigning, how about my boys sit on your right and your left? How about they're the greatest in the kingdom? Once this thing's all kind of said and done and you're set up as the king, how about we make sure that they kind of have a fast track to leadership in the kingdom that you create?" And he, in essence, looks at her, which I just think it's hilarious. He says, "Listen, lady, basically, you don't know what you're asking for. You don't know what you're asking for." And Jesus is going to unpack this for us, and he references something that we're going to see here in a minute. He says, "Can you drink from the cup I'm going to drink?" And while mom asks the question, we don't know if the sons put her up to it. Maybe he gets some brownie points, some sympathy points, because mom's making the request of Jesus, not them. It's pretty bad, man, when your mom's asking for your promotion. That's like not a good thing, right? So they're like, "Jesus, we really want this." Mom's kind of saying that. He says, "You don't know what you're asking for. Can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink?" And they say, "We can." And the cup in the ancient world would be a sign of suffering and difficulty. Like it would be something that you would take on, and you would drink the cup of difficulty and suffering. He's kind of saying, can you take the difficulty and the suffering that I'm going to take? And they look at Jesus and say, "We can do that. We can do that." The story continues. Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink from my cup." He says, "But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared." he looks at James and John. He knows the future, of course, and he says, you guys are going to suffer. You are going to drink from the kind of suffering and difficulty that I'm going to drink from, but I can't promise you these positions that you're asking for. He goes on, he says, when the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the two brothers. Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. He says, not so with you. Right? So now he's turning to James and John, addressing them, asking them if they can suffer like he's going to suffer. And then he's clarifying something that's really important. He's saying, you know that there's this hierarchy, and there's kind of a puffing up of the spirit of some people in this Gentile world, this would be kind of the non-believing world at the time. And he'd say that people that are in charge, they treat you like you're less than them. They lord it over you. And he says that's not how it's supposed to be with you. You're not supposed to do that. I don't want you to interact with each other that way. He goes on, indeed, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. He says, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. This is loaded, right? Loaded verse instead of verses. He says, hey, if you want to be great, whoever wants to be great among you, they must be your servant. That's the way to do that. He says, whoever wants to be first must be your slave. As he talks about the Son of Man, he's talking about himself. So Jesus will often refer to himself as the Son of Man. And that's actually a reference back to the Old Testament and kind of connects him back to Old Testament prophecy. So if you read through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the Bible, you're often going to run into that phrase where Jesus talks about himself as the Son of Man, or other people refer to him as that, and he's talking about himself. And he says, listen, guys, he recognizes he's the leader. He says, I'm here. I didn't come to be served. I came as a servant. I came here to lay down my life for people, to buy people back as a ransom for many people. Right? He says, you're not supposed to be seeking to be the one who's lording it over you, right, people? If you find yourself in a role of leadership, your goal is to be a servant, right? To lay yourself down the way that I'm laying myself down. Now, one of the things I think is fascinating, though, in this whole passage, as John and James, they're looking for advancement, they're looking for glory, they're looking for power, right? And all these things are a part of kind of all of our story. They're all things that at times some of us are going to seek and look for. What's fascinating is this. Jesus didn't condemn the desire for greatness. He revealed the path to it. Catch that, right? He didn't condemn James and John or even their mom, right, for coming to him and saying, hey, can we have greatness in essence? Can we be in a situation where we have power? He didn't look at them and say, what's wrong with you? You're an evil person. That's a terrible thing that you should long for that. What he does instead is says, listen, the way you're trying to get that, do you understand the cost? Do you know the price tag of that kind of greatness? Right? And then he goes ahead and he kind of illustrates what that path is to it. And basically he's going to say, listen, the way to get what you want is not what you think it is, right? It's not what you think it is. I'm going to show you kind of how this all works. Here's how it actually plays out. If you want to get there, here's the road. It's not down this way. It's not trying to seek greatness that you're going to find it. It's through becoming a servant. That's the way to get there. I was thinking about this week, and back in the day, in my first ministry role, I had a fascinating role. Lori and I actually got to work together, and we got to kind of lead this small team of college students. It was awesome. They came from all over the country. They lived in host homes here in the Akron area, and then we would gather up and we would travel together in these 15-passenger vans. And we would all load all our stuff in there and load all these young adults into the vans, and then we would drive like all around the country, and we would visit different ministries and look at different churches, and it was really cool, right? Kind of an amazing experience we got to have a little bit earlier here in our ministry life. And I'll never forget this, because when we would travel, we had cell phones, but it was before smartphones, right? So when you traveled, you still had a map, like a physical map. And Lori would have the light on in this big 15-passenger van, and I'd be driving, and she'd be telling me where to go. And I'll never forget, we were up in Canada, and we had a map from a couple years before. And in Canada, things were growing so rapidly. It was like new neighborhoods. This is up towards Toronto. New neighborhoods were being kind of opened up and multiplying, expanding all the time. And so sometimes we'd run into these scenarios where our map was a little bit outdated, and we thought we were going the right way, and then discovered we weren't, right? And there's no Google Maps to pull up, right? There's no real GPS. We didn't have any of that stuff set up. And so we're trying to figure out how to navigate and find our way to the destination, find the right path, and we're trying to do all this with this map. And so I have this great idea, because I think, hey, we're a little bit behind schedule. I think we can take a shortcut if we cut generally in that direction, because I know where we're trying to get to is that way. And Lori's looking at the map, and she's like, honey, I don't know for sure, right? It doesn't look like that's actually where it's going to lead. I think we should go this longer way around. And I'm like, no, honey, I'm sure it's that way. And I'm like, I'm going for it, right? I think we can get a shortcut. I think we can cut off an hour or two if we cut this way. So I start making my way into the general direction. And I was right? It was generally that way. But as we wind ourselves through, I find that there's this entire blockade that separates the city. And as I'm trying to make my way through to my ultimate destination, I run into this blockade that's breaking down the city, and I, in essence, run into a dead end and discover I've got to go all the way back to Lori's route, the long way, add the extra hour for the attempted shortcut that I tried to pull off, and now I'm twice as late than I was before, right? And eventually we find our way there. I am frustrated, I am mad, and honestly, I wanted to go get my goal accomplished, and that wasn't the right way to get there. I don't know if you've ever done that. You ever been on a path where you thought it would lead you just did not deliver, and it ends up being a dead end, and you got to go back and do it totally different. In essence, that's what Jesus is saying here. He's saying the path to greatness is not to go grab it and take it by force. He said the path to greatness, he's like, if you want it, and it's kind of encouraging it. He's saying if you want greatness, if you want to be great in the kingdom, the way to find that isn't the shortcut to go try to grab hold of greatness. The way is the long way of grabbing hold of service, become a servant, and be a slave to the people around you, be their servant, and then as you do that, your greatness in the kingdom will kind of play out, right? We'll make that all work. It's fascinating that Jesus talked about it this way, and then as our leader, he modeled this in kind of an ultimate way. So want to get our head around this. Jesus is going to be the one who lays down his life first by coming to the planet, right? Christmas. Jesus kind of shrinks himself into human skin, right? He becomes a person, limits himself in that way, agrees to live in a time and a place, to live among sinful people, to live among imperfection and kind of the difficulty and struggle of our world, decides to live a perfect life, honors God fully in that, and as he's living faithfully to God all the way through, he then kind of trades his life for ours, right? He would say, he gave his life as a ransom for many. Jesus is the ultimate servant, right? He's the one who perfectly models this. One of the things that always kind of messes me up as I'm reading through the story of Jesus in the Bible is it blows my mind that Jesus is simply doing what God asked him to do. What a simple statement. Jesus did what God asked him to do. See, Jesus' service in some ways, right, it's the unique work that God required of him, that he asked of him. I can't do what Jesus did. You can't do what Jesus did. Only Jesus could do what Jesus did. And Jesus, as he was fulfilling the will of God, it would cost him his life in pursuit of that. It would cost him a radical service that's kind of far beyond anything that we would ever think of. And of course, today, he now is enjoying the ultimate glory in heaven. He has the name above all names. He's seated at the right hand of God. Right? He lives in comfort, and he continues to use his influence and his power to serve people, but from a very different vantage point than he did when he was here on the planet. Right? But I just want us to get a hold of this. I almost just want us to get a minute to feel this, that Jesus' life, his death, burial, resurrection, his suffering, was all what God asked him to do. He was being an obedient servant. So as a person who's going to follow the leader, if I'm going to look for God's will in my life, what I need to kind of set my expectations up at is that it's probably going to look somewhat like what Jesus and his sacrifice is going to look like. Different circumstances. It's going to be a different set of requirements, different obedience for sure, but it's going to cost me something. And actually, Jesus talks about this. Let me show you this next passage. Jesus would talk about what's required of the person who follows him, who says, hey, you're my leader. Here's what he would say. Jesus said to the disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple, right? He's like, I'm the leader. If you want to be my follower, he says, you must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. And here Jesus is laying out for us a pretty counterintuitive statement. He's saying, hey, you want to save your life? Lose it. He says before, you want to be great? Be nothing, in essence. And the person who lays their life down, the person who loses their life, they're going to be the one that finds it. And there's this, Jesus kind of talking about his upside down kingdom, how his kingdom works, how his leadership works. It's kind of the opposite of what we would expect. It's the opposite of what we would think. And he's describing that here. In essence, he's saying, you need to, like me, lay down your life, and as you do that, he promises you're going to find it. Be a slave, be a servant, lose your life. You're going to find it. That's where greatness is. Follow me. I'm doing it too. I'll show you the way. And he kind of lays this all out. It's made me think this, as I was looking at this passage, sometimes I have the great privilege of teaching college classes. And it's an awesome honor. I love doing it. And sometimes I get to, of course, be a part of grading the papers and doing all the work along with that. And if you went to college, you're familiar with how it works. You get a syllabus, and in the syllabus, there's kind of an assignment for how a paper should be written. And I didn't even have this when I was in school, but often there's also a rubric with it. There's kind of there's a set of clear statements about how the paper will be graded based on doing it the way it was described being done. And if you want to get a good grade, like, you just have to literally do what the instructions say to do what the rubric says, and if you do that, you get a good grade, right? And so often I'll be grading papers as I'm teaching these classes here at Grace College, which is an awesome program, by the way, if you're looking to get into ministry. Amazing place to learn ministry for sure. As I'm grading these papers, I'll see sometimes amazing work that just happens to have nothing to do with the assignment. So there'll be an amazing, beautiful PowerPoint presentation, but the basic requirements of the class aren't met, even though it's beautiful to look at, even though it's an amazing piece of work. It actually doesn't even come close to meeting the requirements, and the student will get a bad grade because they didn't do what was simply asked of them. When I first read these set of verses, I read that somebody wants to save their life, they've got to lose it. Part of what came to me is I had a hard time figuring out, what does that mean? What does it mean to lose my life, to lay down my life? Jesus talks about it a little bit more. Here's where he says, what good will it be for somebody to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? What can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, then he will reward each person according to what they have done. What does it mean to lay down my life? What does it mean to lose my life? What's Jesus talking about here when he says you don't want to forfeit your soul, right? How does this all play out? When I was thinking about this as a brand new believer, being introduced to following Jesus kind of for the first time, hearing these words, when I heard, I need to lose my life, I need to lay down my life, I need to take up my cross, follow Jesus, I just assumed that meant that I should just go find suffering somewhere. That anything that I like doing, I should stop doing, right? Because that must be what it means. Jesus suffered on the cross. That means that I should stop doing the kind of things in my life that I enjoy. And what's fascinating, as long as those things aren't necessarily sinful, that's not really what Jesus is saying. Jesus isn't saying that you shouldn't take care of yourself anymore, that you shouldn't exercise, that you shouldn't get a good night's sleep, that you shouldn't do the kind of the basic things that causes us to be a human being. What he's saying is stop pursuing and being obsessed with your own advancement and be obsessed with and be focused on the things of my kingdom. In response to what I've done to you, it's almost like Jesus would say, in response to how I've laid down my life for you, given myself for you, I want you to be so blown away by that you respond by saying, forget what I could have, forget what I could gain. I'm going to live the rest of my life trying to be obedient to what God wants me to do. I'm going to give the very best of myself to you and to your kingdom, Jesus. Whatever you want me to do, I'm in. I want to be obedient as a servant like you have been. You guys, this is critical, right? When we're talking about this, all we're trying to do is say, God, what's the rubric for my life? I know Jesus made me right with you. He brought us into a relationship. How do I live a life that's pleasing to you? What's the rubric? I want to get an A. I don't want to just go chase a bunch of stuff that I think you might like. I want to know, what does your word say? What is your heart? What is your passion? What have you called me to do? And I want to be maximized for you, not for me. I want to maximize my life for your kingdom. And that could be done in extremely ordinary ways. I want to be, God, I want to be the kind of parent that you've called me to be. I want to be single with the kind of purity and intensity that you have called me to be. I want to engage the marriage that I'm in with the kind of intensity and diligence that you've called me to engage it with. I want to be at the workplace I'm in with all of my heart, soul, mind, and strength, loving you as I do this with excellence. I want to be used and spent and invested for your kingdom, not for my advancement or my glory. That's what Jesus is saying. He's not saying, hey, if you enjoy nature and creation or biking, that you should give that up. He's not saying that. He's saying, hey, use your resources, make it your goal to aim at spending yourself for my cause, not for the advancement of yourself. It's kind of the heart and the mindset of it. It's fascinating as we think about following the leader. We want to start to get our hearts and minds around, what does this look like for me? How do I, if I'm going to look at Jesus, and I'm going to look at a radical example of what he's done, laying his life down, and doing that as an act of obedience to the Father, and doing it as an act of love for you and me, as I'm his follower, how do I respond then as I follow Christ, as I make him my leader to follow? And here's kind of what I think we should walk away with today. We follow the leader, We surrender self and we move towards service. Right? Pretty simple. There's a decision to make on kind of a high level, and I think there's a daily decision to make that we all kind of are engaged in forever. At the highest level, I got to ask myself, have I surrendered self yet? Have I looked at my life and said, Jesus, here, this one's yours. I don't really care what my life accomplishes as long as it's connected to you and doing what you want me to do and doing things that are pleasing to you. I'm good with that. If I never, quote unquote, amount to anything, if nobody ever knows my name, if I never get the human recognition for it, if I never get rich and famous, if I'm never as comfortable as I want to be, if I never find the spouse that I wish I had, if I never, right, you name it, can I lay all that down and say, here, I want you to kind of fill my plate, Christ, with what you want me to do. I don't want to live somebody else's life. I want to live my life for your glory. I want to surrender self, and I want to move towards service, the kind of service that you've called me to do. You've called me to engage. So I think the question for all of us becomes this. If I'm going to follow Jesus, the one who is laying down and has laid down his life for our sake, what does it look like for me to engage that today? And the question becomes, Jesus, what are you asking me to do right now? What's my act of service today? How do I surrender self? And I think that's part of where we need to land today, is asking that question at kind of a foundational level. For some of us, this is going to end up being surrendering self for the first time. There's a crisis moment to say, I believe what you're saying, Jesus, that if I abandon my pursuit of my own selfish gain, that I can trust you with it, that I can look at you and say, Jesus, you're going to take care of me. Doesn't mean all my dreams are going to come true, but you're going to make me great by your definition. And I'm going to trust you. And if you say it's good, I'm going to believe it's good. And it starts by recognizing what Jesus has done for us. His life, death, burial, resurrection, right? All of it together. And I look and say, Jesus, you've laid down your life for me. And if you've never received that message, saying, I'm going to surrender myself and take the life that Jesus died to give me, that's the first step. Christ, if you laid down your life for me, I'm in. I want in on that. I say yes. Receive the forgiveness of my sins. I kind of abandon the pursuit of my own gain, and I pursue you now. Your kingdom is what I long for. I receive the forgiveness of my sins. Guys, and for the rest of us, the way that God works with us, the way that Jesus is going to call us, is there's always going to be some unique circumstances that we're in. There's a phase, there's a window, there's a season, there's a situation, and there's an obedience to God in that situation. And a lot of times we know what it is. We know what we need to do. And it's just a matter of having the courage and the responsiveness to say, man, Jesus, if you're calling me, I want to do that. I want to move forward in it. Maybe that's taking a part of my life and figuring out, man, how do I engage this more fully for God's glory? Maybe it's starting a new habit. Maybe it's getting involved in something that I need to get involved in. Maybe it's physically being here on the weekend. Maybe it's reconciling a relationship. I have no idea what your scenario might look like. But I bet there's something, if you are a follower of Jesus today, I bet there's something that God is putting on your heart or your mind that he's saying, here's the rubric. Here's what it means to please me. I want to keep leading you into this and asking you to follow me. Guys, that's the question I want us to dive into. Lord, where are you leading me today? How do I serve you? Not to earn anything, but to say thank you for who you are. So we're going to have a little time to process that question, kind of land there. And then can we trust that as we move forward in obedience to Christ, he's going to take care of us in the process? Would you pray with me? Lord, I want to say thank you for your radical example of what it looks like to lay down your life in passion, in service and obedience to the Father. And Lord, we're kind of blown away by it. We're amazed by you. The fact that you would be willing to lower yourself to such lengths, to such depths, to love us, to meet us where we are, and to change us from the inside out. And Lord, we ask that you would make us like that. Help us to see the opportunities that we have right in front of us, right here and now, to be a servant like you, Christ. What are you calling us to? What's the thing in front of us that we haven't been willing to tackle that you're saying, I want you just to do this. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be fancy. Just do what I'm asking you to do and trust me in it. I'll take care of it. Lord, we want to believe that. Would you help us with that? Lead us, give us courage. Help us to follow you, our leader today. In your name we pray, Jesus.